Hello, She Sober City listeners. Professor Selena Bartlett joins us today. Professor Bartlett is a world-renowned neuroscientist. She is a group leader of addiction and obesity at the Translational Research Institute and professor in clinical sciences at the Queensland University of Technology. Outside of the lab, the professor shares her powerful message about how to train the mindset using the principles of brain plasticity. She's the podcast host of the amazing Thriving Minds podcast and a widely published author and commentator on addiction, obesity, and mindset. Today, of course, we are tackling the subject of addiction. Welcome, Professor Selena Bartlett.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to meet your audience.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited about this podcast as well. Now, on LinkedIn, I've been reading with excitement about your daily brain health challenge. You offer simple brain challenges that we can all do to promote brain health. Now, just kicking off with some basics, would you mind just offering a description about what is brain health? What is neuroplasticity?
So the difference between brain health and mental health, they are intimately tied, clearly. And the reason I did that challenge is for people to see that the brain's potential. So brain health describes the upward potential of the brain. And most of us don't even realize that we're kind of really untapped in our potential and the brain's ability for change and neuroplasticity. And today we're going to talk a lot about what locks us down and prevents us from unlocking that potential. And brain health describes the connections, the physical brain, demonstrating when the brain is connecting well and healthy, like the actual physicality of the brain. If you want to think about this, think about your arm muscle, just the muscle in your arm. And when you go to the gym and you're pumping weights, you know that as you pump those weights, you'd start to see you're getting a bit of tone and shape in those muscles. Well, the brain's the same. It's not exactly like a muscle, but it could be trained like a muscle. And that's the bit that I think is a bit missing in these conversations. And that's the bit I was trying to help bring to fruition, basically.
Oh, thank you for describing that. And it already provides you with a bit of motivation that you've got power to promote your own brain health, to do amazing things.
You may be wondering, like people listening thinking that sounds way too simple. But what happened in the last 10 years in scientific breakthrough is the technology. So the first time in more than 7,000 years of living history, we can see inside a human living brain performing tasks and looking at it in 3 and 4 dimensions. And that's been a significant breakthrough in my scientific journey as a neuroscientist that I didn't think you and I'd be able to have this conversation about. So that's why you didn't know about it. It's not your fault. I didn't know either. And that's just where we are in history. That's the beauty of science and the upward trajectory of brain.
Oh, thank you, Selena. If I was to run a scenario by you, so let's just say you have a 48-year-old woman before you. She's got the signs of burnout on the horizon. Her drinking has started to become problematic. What does your research about our brains tell us about how generations before her and her childhood environment may inform her stress response and her drinking habits now? And should she be disheartened? Are those habits set in stone, or hopeful that change is possible?
Well, as you know, I'm only about the change is possible. Otherwise, I would not be here doing these podcasts. I'd still be in my lab trying to unpick it all. So let's just start with the top filter theme. Addiction is simply, or drinking, whatever you want to call it, is a medication for stress. And I started in the brain game in 1991. And I thought it was simply unpicking all the different structures in the brain and understanding the pathology and then developing drugs. And I did that for a long time across the world. and I'm a pharmacist by training. But what I came to learn, and where I went really wrong and went down a rabbit hole in the wrong direction, was the understanding through the work of Ander and Folletti starting in 1986 that actually adverse childhood experiences are the underlying root cause of what generates addiction. But because it's so separated in time from childhood or in utero through to adulthood, that connection has been lost. We now understand that connection, and by understanding that and actually seeing its impact on the physical brain, that gives us the best opportunity to make the change. And why it's not easy for this woman that's experiencing, and I was that woman too, just FYI, as I was running a huge lab.
I might have been too.
Yeah, and I was studying this at the time, and I didn't understand it in this way because I was doing it. I was down the rabbit hole in a different direction. But that alcohol is serving a brilliant purpose, and that is to keep all the plates that are spinning in the air spinning.
Wow.
So you describe it as burnout. I describe it as trying to keep 10 plates spinning in the air, and eventually, because the brain doesn't like a lot of stress, it will shut down, or it will drive us to find solutions that are immediate. So alcohol is, if you think about the scales of justice, because I know there's a lot of lawyers here.
Yeah.
I call it the brain scales of justice. On one side is all of this stress, and it's building up. And on the other side, the brain is always going to balance it because it's a dynamic homeostatic organ, and it's going to drive you to dopamine, serotonin, neurochemical reaching things. And alcohol and drugs and gambling and all these other releases, social media scrolling, gives an immediate release. So you get that short-term satisfaction that you've mitigated the stress. But the problem is with all of this is the long-term consequences, because actually, once you understand how alcohol changes the brain, which is what I do in my research lab, you'll understand that it then leads to greater stress. Means the plates are going to come down faster than if you're able to understand these other concepts of how to train the brain like a muscle, and to how to change the way stress is coming at your brain. Because when we're putting our life together, raising kids, big stressful deadline jobs, that's not going away. Aging's not going away. Parents and elderly looking at, we're in a sandwich generation for some of us. Financial pressure, mortgage interest rates, poverty, all these things, they're not going away. But the one thing that you can do, and that's what I learned to do for myself, starting in around 2013, that's how long it took me to do this. You can learn these strategies and understand that you've got control through certain mechanisms of preventing the way that stress is wiring your brain towards addiction. Wow. And that's a breakthrough because, and why is it so hard? So you asked me about the early environment and genetics. So genetics explains around 60% of addiction. So we have genetic susceptibility depending on the genes we inherited. And if you're like me, I've got very strong Scottish heritage. I got my DNA sequenced. So my stuff goes back, to the Battle of Culloden.
Yes, I'm a Ferguson.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, so I only discovered this recently. So, and Irish. So, as you know, we used a lot of alcohol to mitigate all of that trauma. It was a very traumatic environment in the 17 and 1800s, and then we escaped to Australia. Well, my heritage. So that sets some background. And this is not for people to go, oh no, it's all over for me. No, it's the knowledge raises all boats, and that's not the only factor that explains it. It's only one factor, and it's only around 50 to 60%, depending on the environment that your brain grew up in. So there's many mitigating protective factors that prevent the way those genes wire the architecture of the brain that lead to addiction. So, and that's the bit you can really change, and you can change it forever. But it just gets harder as you get older. So it's the combination of genetics and environment that impact this ability of the woman that you described to be able to handle it. She learned that technique very young, and she probably watched her parents or grandparents do it as well.
Yeah, that's right. So it's useful to be aware of this history and this background that has, I guess, in her formative years have led her to have a certain style of stress response.
Well, it's the only time that makes you feel, the alcohol is the only thing that makes you feel good.
Yeah.
It's the thing that people don't understand, is that it's a fantastic tool when you have no others. You've been given no others, and that one works, and it helps you get through doing all this stuff that you're trying to do. Now, I just have to mention one thing because I forgot to mention it. So the other breakthrough that happened for me, because I went into this to understand why my sister got a mental illness, which we'll talk about later. But the thing that was missing in my research after 20 years was these breakthrough studies in adverse childhood experiences by Anda and Folletti. And they did these amazing, remarkable work. And you can actually quantitate the amount of early life experiences that increases your susceptibility to developing addiction later in life. And once I got that, then the window opened and everything changed for me, and I had to retool and change my research lab because I was in the wrong direction. And that is called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, and we all have a score or a number, and that number, which is between 0 and 10, is highly correlative with your ability to develop addiction. So if we take an extreme example, let's take an extreme example, not in this gray area that you talk about, but in IV heroin use in, say, women, 89% of that is explained by an ACE score above 4. 89%. And the majority of women IV drug using have been sexually abused.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about this, we're not talking about simple things too, but and when we open this curtain to understanding this, it really is a game changer, because unless we start thinking about societally how to change the root causes, this will continue to perpetrate for 3 generations forward. So when you're making these beautiful changes in your life, and it's not, there's a lot, I just want to let you know I'm not sober, but I am, I can moderate my own drinking, because I don't think I ever had that. Well, I probably did at one point. It could have gone one direction or the other.
Yes,
but,
understood.
Yeah, but I'm saying that these factors that step in, that play out when we're older, is because we've never learned other tools, and never been shown other tools, and then the shame and blame game starts to step in when we get older. And then when once upon a time we're heroes for being able to take down a whole bottle of champagne and be the life of the party, all of a sudden the people that don't go on to need alcohol to mitigate their stress, then you're doing that, and your life is starting to actually slowly fall apart, and you're not really realizing it. But then now you're shamed for it. It's a really interesting thing about how we treat this. But yeah, as we have know now that you're just using it as a medication, and all medications, they can be altered and changed. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, I really like the way that it's quite empowering of people, because they are able to realize that some of their habits, their beliefs, the way that they cope is not because that they're a broken or problematic person. It's come from
they're not at all.
historical perspective, and they can that alone is just enough to motivate to learn more about then what they can do.
Yeah. And the other thing I learned was, when I say the thing that when you make these changes, I call it paving a yellow brick road, because you've got to pave a whole new neural circuitry. And what got wired in over a few generations doesn't get wired out in a week.
Yeah.
It's also, when you're making these changes, if you want to keep pursuing the yellow brick road but you fall off, know that as you keep paving it and laying down those bricks, you're actually changing 3 generations going forward of your children and grandchildren. You're breaking the cycle. All cycles can be broken.
Yeah, that's a lovely imagery. And just to dig into that imagery a bit more, can you just talk a bit more about how you're paving your new pathway, or is it like a neural pathway? So how do you do that?
So I think you're kind of doing this through your podcasts and coaching and other groups. So you hear a lot about how connection is the opposite of addiction and all of these things. But it's also necessary to have connection to yourself, because even though that sounds individual, it still matters because that gets lost for a lot of people during early life experiences, just the nature of growing up in certain family structures and stuff like that. So the first brick that goes down is listening to this podcast.
Yep.
To be really frank, and understanding the new science has completely transformed our understanding of addiction. It's not what you've been hearing. And you can make these changes through the right connections and supporting yourself through the right scientific knowledge and empowerment.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be this whole big approach that you hear about all the time, that you've got to go and do all of this huge thing because you're disaster and whatever you're being told by people. You can make small changes, and the small changes can start by taking a panoramic view, which we're going to talk about later. But there's small little steps, because what are we doing? Remember the brain scales of justice? So we put alcohol over here because it helps us keep it in balance.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do as we're now thinking about reducing our alcohol consumption? Rather than just go, like some people might have to detoxify because they can't do anything else, and there's a whole medical approach there that's totally necessary. But if it's not problematic drinking where you're just at a really high level and it's starting to really concern you, then the first place to start is just by reducing it by one drink, for example. But as we take it down, we've got to replace it with other things to balance that side of the scales.
That's
and
right.
if we don't do that, alcohol will always feel the need because it's been learnt over such a long period of time. So that's one strategy for people that are in what you call the gray zone. And when we're talking about alcohol dependence and high levels of addiction, where it's like large amounts of alcohol over a long period of time, that's a completely different conversation that requires a medical intervention approach and a whole set of strategies wrapped around that. And I want to make that super clear, because that's a completely different conversation that requires, working with doctors and alcohol and drug services units and things like that. But if we want to approach this from, how do we put the first brick down? So for me, it was recognizing, after I learned this, was as I'm going home from work, right, huge team of people, got to get the dinner on the table, and I used to open the bottle of wine. I could even hear the cork coming out on the way home, because they have corks in America still. But so what I learnt was I had built an association around can't wait to get home to have that half a glass of wine while I'm cooking to get the food on the table. Half would go to half a bottle over time. And so I worked out a new strategy where I had this lovely view from where I was living at the time. And I spent some time just taking in that view before I'd even enter the door of facing the kids and the preparation. I also learnt some other strategies of, not having to be the only person cooking or everything for the family. So this is going back 10 years ago now, just FYI. I've been on a completely different journey since that time. But there's so many little strategies and tools that you can implement. And that's why I ran that 31-day brain health challenge, because I wanted to give, because everyone's different situation, different needs, different things will resonate with them.
That's
and they
right.
can't all do what we're talking about. Some people are actually at home.
Yeah.
They're not coming in from work, or, they're working from home. There's so many different scenarios playing out here, but there's so many brain health strategies that are available.
Yeah.
If you have the opportunity to find them, basically.
Yeah. Oh, look, thank you. And what I really love about the little techniques that you've already put on Instagram, LinkedIn, they're on both actually.
I'm putting them on.
You could do them in bite-size amounts that's not taking up your whole day, because normally you don't want to overstress the person that's already stressed.
Exactly.
You kind of, you're trying to make it simple. What I'd really love to hear about, Selena, is your favorite ways, your hot tips of promoting brain health. And I can put my hand up to say that I've suggested a few of these with some clients, the ones that I've seen on your website. So particularly with those that are really stressed and wake up stressed and then are replacing alcohol when they're trying to take a break with scrolling,
Yeah.
that we're using your wake up,
Uh-huh.
don't touch the phone,
Yeah.
find a vista or a
Yeah. Uh-huh.
panorama, do some breaths, think about some positive aspects of your life, then get on with it. So simple,
And
easy
how they
starts.
finding that?
It's doing them a whole lot of good because first of all, they're putting down that phone, but they're checking in. I mean, it's so simple, but so many of us just, you
But it's
wake
hard to
up
do, isn't it?
alarmed.
Hard to remember,
Yeah. Yeah.
So let me I think that's the best one, to be honest, to start out with
Yeah.
on first, to make it really simple.
Mm.
But it's actually not simple in terms of how it's working neuroscientifically. So the interesting thing is that the visual system, if you in the brain, represents about 50% of the activity of the brain. So when you're taking in that big, wide, open view, you're actually activating the visual system, which is naturally turning down physiologically, neurologically, the stress system.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're just using your physiology.
Yep. You've got it inside of you. You're switching your nervous system over, aren't you, into sort of calm mode.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you can keep doing it throughout the day. The other thing that's really important for stress, it adds up through the day.
Huh.
So I see it as cumulative.
Yep.
And that's why we want to drink at night time or the afternoon for in those gray areas, because because we haven't taken care of it during the daytime. So I like to throw in there intermittent, go and do it through the day.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter when you do it or when you miss it. You can just keep trying it. And the reason I also like this is because if you can't remember to take a panoramic view, you can't change your life.
Mm.
So that's the first step in laying down the bricks in the yellow brick road. You just start there. And once that's laid down, meaning you just do it naturally, automatically, just like you reach for alcohol automatically before you've even realized
Yeah.
it, because those two parts of the brain are intimately wired together. Stress and reward sit in the oldest part of the brain, and they're wired together because they keep you alive and safe and secure.
Yeah.
And I know I've got this, I know how to handle it, says the brain. So now what we're trying to do is we're trying to attach something else to that. And that's what the panoramic view allows us to do. It's the first step, but you don't rewire in a new thing overnight. It takes time. And that's why I call it the yellow brick road. And once you've laid down one, that's it. Lay down one first. Don't try and do a million things because they'll
Yeah.
all fall apart. The other key to neuroplasticity, that's what we're talking about here, if we're talking about changing things, right? So the panoramic view is one step to do that. And it takes consistency, not intensity.
Ah.
So when we get really, because our brain likes novelty, we hear something new. Oh, I'm going to do that. I'm going to go and do that. That's fantastic. Tomorrow.
Yep.
And then you
That's
do it the
me.
next day. It's
Yeah.
all, and then the next day, and then it falls apart after day 3. So that's why I say we do something really simple with consistency over a period of time till it's now the new automatic thing the brain goes to. And you're
Yeah.
not doing it. The brain's doing it for you. You're using the physiology, the power of the brain to rewire a new habit. But it's that first brick or 10. And that's why I just do one thing. The other thing that I would give in terms of a really, really, really powerful tip is, and depending on your heart issues and everything, so just take that into account, is the cold shower. The cold shower really taps neuroplasticity, and especially if you start small on your toes and build up to the back of your neck. The back of your neck is a gateway from the brain to the whole body for the nervous system. And it really is a way to unlock the past and create the new gateway, because the panoramic view is great for turning down the stress system, but sometimes we've got to unlock the past with some really wild strategies, and the cold exposure is one of those.
Yeah.
Because it actually activates both the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems automatically, but it's a great way to tap immediately into the whole concept of neuroplasticity. And what I mean by that is when you got that cold exposure, not only do you get the pain response, which you can breathe your way through,
Yeah.
what happens is, right, the blood flow the nervous system is constricting the blood flow, right? All your blood vessels are innervated by nerves.
Yeah.
So you're immediately constricting and vasodilating your blood vessels. It's another cool new physiological tool that you're not having to use your willpower. You just,
Yeah.
you're just stepping into this thing knowing that you're making these changes.
And how long would you, just on a functional sense, how long would it take to stand in that shower? You're
So
doing it slowly over
very
time.
slowly because people won't do it.
Yeah.
It's very, very, for some people, they just want to go straight in. And for other people, they just won't even try it because it sounds horrible. And men tend to like it more than women. But basically starting at 10 seconds on your toes.
Yep.
And that's it.
Okay. I love it.
At the end of a warm shower, just turn it to cold and put it on your toes. And then what I did the 10-week Wim Hof course and measured everything. And I built up like that. And to now I can do all sorts of things I could not do before I did this training.
And I couldn't. Yeah. What are those sorts of things? What are examples?
Oh, well, for example, I hated the cold, and I would be on the edge of a swimming pool and my kids would be playing in the pool. I wouldn't even jump in because I hated it so much. And I was always wrapped up, always feeling cold, always. Totally different person. It's a demonstration also of confidence, because if you can push through this pain through the breathing and then you see these changes that you thought you couldn't do cold and now you can, you realize also that you can do anything you set your mind to, with appropriate training tools and support in place. And so there's just so many beautiful elements about this, because it gives you so much more confidence in your ability to take on pain too, and also do hard things, hard stuff, because life is not you're not meant to always feel good. You're meant to also push through discomfort to achieve goals, to create your life, to finish your degrees, to look after your kids and support them. There's so many things that life is quite stressful about. So these provide us opportunities to build our confidence that we can do the hard stuff too.
Yeah. I really love it because it complements the journey that a lot of people go on, and I hate that term journey, but the whole experience of breaking up with alcohol, because you are inevitably going to have to sit with uncomfortable thoughts and feelings that alcohol has distracted you from. You're suddenly in the present. So if you're also doing a brain activity, or you're using some resource that is really, really pushing you through discomfort and you're achieving it, you are realizing that you're stronger than you think you are. You don't need to numb out. And that's got to be a great thing for the whole experience.
Yes. And the thing that really, really woke me up scientifically is that, you know how you hear about the autonomic nervous system?
Yeah.
Meaning you don't have control over this and that because it's outside your conscious control. Well, now we can see the subconscious and you can change it.
Yeah.
And that to me says that the textbooks have been rewritten and you can no longer call it the autonomic nervous system. We have a nervous system, and it can be trained with training and effort in certain directions that can lead to being happy, healthy, and strong.
Oh, and who doesn't want to be happy, healthy, and strong?
Yeah.
What I might jump to now, if that's all right, Selena, is it is so easy to pick up that you've got a deep passion for the work that you do. What's driven you to pursue this work and all the research that you're undertaking?
Well, it happened because my sister got a mental illness in Brisbane in 1989. And she was in a lockup ward in Brisbane, and I was doing a pharmacy degree. Speaking of only caring about myself, that's how I was.
Yeah.
To be really honest. And I was doing an honours degree around consumer behaviour in pharmacies. And I was planning to open a women's cooperative of pharmacies across Queensland, because men own the pharmacies, and I thought women need part-time work, but they also need to get some of the profit. And so that was one of my intentions at that time in my life. And then I got a phone call, and I was doing halfway through my program, and my mother said, it's your sister, there's something wrong. Anyway, we ended up in the lockup ward with her for 3 weeks, visiting her in and out, and the state of that was quite confronting, and I had no idea how bad it was. And this is just in 89. Just not that long ago.
No.
And, so the moment that sprung me out of what I was doing and into this pathway was when I was sitting in this room, and my sister was catatonic from an overdose of haloperidol, and the doctors there saying that this is it, she's not going to, this is going to be, and the diagnoses were they had no idea. They were just labeling it. It's not this, it's not that, so therefore it's this. And then at the moment I was sitting there, I'm thinking, wow, we really don't know how the brain works, do we? Because if you knew how small her symptoms were and the treatment that happened as a response, it's so disproportionate in size. And so from that moment, I went back, I did my PhD in neuropharmacology, and then I moved to Canberra for 6 years as a postdoc, did a training by the top neuroscientists at ANU. Then I moved to America with a 3-year-old and a 4-month-old baby, ran a research lab there for 12 years, and in the top addiction center in the world at that time. And it was very competitive and very hard. And that's why I was doing a pharmacy, a medically trained approach, which is still going on predominantly, but it's changing because our technology is much better. And I work with Pfizer and all the drug companies, and I established this huge program of pipeline therapeutics for addiction, PTSD, and anxiety and stuff. And then I got recruited back to Australia to run the research lab I'm now doing. So the transition point happened around 2009. A young woman who's an assistant professor ran into me in the corridor, and she said, "Selena, do you really think that medications are going to solve these problems you're trying to solve?" And at the time I said yes. And she said, "I'm going to bring you up to my lab." So she took me up to her lab, and what she was looking at was animals on a exercise wheel. And at that point, the technology had got to the stage where we could image the changes in the brain that were happening in an adult brain through this exercise, and she would map it down to the tiny little synaptic changes in the neural circuitry. And it didn't still click with me until I got recruited back to Australia. And in that transition phase where we showed sugar as addictive as alcohol and nicotine, everything clicked. And then all the studies around adverse childhood experiences, they've been going for 20 years, but I hadn't been aware of them. Everything just came into place, and the curtain opened. And unfortunately, my sister took her life in 2006. So I wasn't able to do this for her, but so everything I do now is in honor of her, and also because we can do something different by shining a light on this new science, this new approach, this ability to share information using podcasts and connection through community, using social media for good and not for bad, and everything that you're doing and other people are doing in these spaces. Yeah.
With all of the work you're doing, and even just listening to just a very quick run through of your milestones in your life, it seems like you always have something on the boil. You're always busy. What's on the horizon for you at the moment?
Oh, so many things. I can't reveal all of them because one I can talk about that I'm really happy about, and that's the documentary film that I'm I'm participating in, and there's a star who's the protagonist, about the great separation by award-making filmmaker Shannon Swan. And it's been sold to television, but it's under embargo. And that's coming out in October, and it's a beautiful film, and it's helping to restore youth connection, to help them become happy, healthy, and strong, and helping us reconnect as communities. And I really powerfully believe in the strength of our society in Australia and a community to rebuild what we're losing. So that's really cool. But I'm also writing another book, and it's called Thriving Minds for Parents and Carers.
Yes.
And it's all about parent-child neuroplasticity, explaining this in a way that parents who are super busy can access something simple to do to break the multi-generational cycle that we've been through because we didn't know any better, and it's no one's fault. and to build in the new scientific studies that are changing every day, but updating what I've done in the past and trying to make it accessible. I've already got some feedback where they're so busy that this definitely will have to be an audio book.
Yes.
Because I'm trying to get feedback from parents with little ones, and it's very hard because they're so busy, but I have got brilliant feedback. But the first thing I've noticed is this needs to be an audio book. And then I'm writing a few other books too, coming down the pike. Some of them will be around alcohol addiction,
Yes.
people with lived experience, and some from the foster care system, and how some people in the foster care system 4 generations in have broken the cycle of the foster care system through understanding adverse childhood experiences, and have reunited with their great-grandparents that gave them up because they had to, because they couldn't look after them because their fathers had died in the war. And the first generation went in because they couldn't look after 8 kids, and all these new learnings coming out of this science. So there's just so much opportunity for all of us to take all of this new knowledge and create a better Australia.
Your work is absolutely invaluable. I am fascinated. I could talk to you for so long.
Yeah.
And in fact, I would love to invite you back on down the track when you've got free time, which is probably hard for you to find, to talk about sugar, to talk
Yes.
about,
Sugar.
yeah, with me who sits in my car hiding away, knocking back my cherry ripes so no one sees.
The other thing is that's interesting about the sugar, that Alcoholics Anonymous used sugar as a replacement for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, that's just replacing another addiction with another addiction.
I'm not against it if it's working for people, but our lab showed that sugar changes the brain in exactly the same way as alcohol and nicotine.
Not surprised.
Like physically, and that was my big go-to, FYI.
Yeah.
So I'd love to talk about that sometime in the future. That'd be wonderful.
Oh, thank you. And also just the work you're doing now with early childhood and parenting. I'm also fascinated by that. Professor Selena Bartlett, where can people find you, and particularly your brain health challenge? Where can they find that?
Yes, it's a book coming. Yes,
Love it.
it came because everyone kept asking me where it is. I did that. People can find that on LinkedIn by following me on Instagram, but you can also go to my website, which is profselenabartlett.com. I also have another website called thriving-minds.com. And so you can find all my talks and my work there.
Okay.
And, that's kind of where the easiest place is to find my work.
Thank you. I'll put all of that in the show notes so everyone that listens can jump on, and I'm going to share it around because I think,
of course, the Thriving Mind podcast. We can't forget that one.
Please, everyone listening, I now have that on my top rotation podcast list when I'm out walking the dog, and I always come back with something new, and always something new that I pass on to my clients as well. Just a little hot tip from Professor Bartlett.
That's good.
Yeah, it is
That's
really
the
helpful.
aim, right? The aim is to raise everyone's boat.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us on She's Sober Sydney. So grateful, and just look forward to seeing what else you produce out there in the realm of brain health. Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely to talk to you, and thank you for having me.
You're welcome.